I want to welcome everyone to the Happy House Hunters group today. And today we are talking to Sean Lahr, and he's talking all about filling those units. And for those of you that follow this podcast, we talk about how to find the real estate, then how to fund it, and then how to fix it, because oftentimes we're as investors, we're buying something that we need to force some value into. So we're going to fix it, and we can get much better deals that way if we buy some properties that need work. And then once we find it, fund it, and fix it, now we have to decide, are we going to flip it? Meaning, are we going to put it back out on the market, or are we going to hold it and fill it? And then finally, what is your freedom number? How many of those do you have to do to make that day job optional? So right now, today, we are talking about buying and holding. And so we're talking about filling those units. Now, Sean and I, we met at several different real estate meetups, and I just love talking with him every time I see him. He's a wealth of information. He is so caring and sharing and giving. And so as an investor, if you say, oh, I'm struggling with this, he's like, oh, I've got somebody that can help you with that. And so it's invaluable to have friends like Sean, let me tell you, especially when you're starting out in this industry, because that seems to be the big question is, how do we go forward? We can have the folks that can help find the deals and fund the deals, but then fixing and flipping and filling, that's just a lot of information to sort through. Sean works with Focus Realty. Am I correct? Focus?
Yes.
That's the name of the realty. And it's in Lancaster. He is a realtor and a property manager with Focus. He is a residential and a buyer seller agent. He's a residential landlord agent. He's a tenant landlord agent. He's a commercial buyer seller agent. He wears all the hats, and that's why his information is so valuable. So, Sean, tell us, what is your journey? How in the world did you get into property management, and what sparked your interest in that, and how did it all begin with you?
Yeah. So when I had gotten out of high school, I had joined the National Guard, and I got back from all my training and stuff in roughly 2020, early 2020, end of 2019. Around that time, CJ had started investing. CJ is my stepfather, and he had been buying properties, kind of getting into the investment space, and he had this deal that was a triplex. The seller was kind of motivated to get it sold. He was in a position where he wasn't really in a spot to buy that property, and so he had made an introduction to me, kind of helped walk me through my first deal with buying that. And from there, I actually right afterwards went on a deployment for a year, got back, and in 2021 I had was looking for a job. I'd started under You Pick to Rent, help them with some of the customer service type stuff, accounts payable, those kinds of things. And then from there, when Focus started, I moved over to there and started working on getting my license for being able to get into property management more.
Well, what made you decide property management? I mean, what was it that you said, I think I like this gig? Because I'll tell you what, when I talk to wannabe investors, real estate investors, oftentimes they go, oh, I hear that landlording is terrible, and my uncle had these properties and he was getting calls all night long. And so I'm thinking, what makes a person go, I think I like the property management piece? What made you decide that that's where you wanted to go with it?
It's a busy environment. I like kind of busyness. I like to stay busy. I didn't really have anything going on as far as like other opportunities at that time. And when I was looking at everything and I was starting to look at and buying more properties, investing and things like that, during that time frame of 2021, that was kind of running concurrently with my investments. So in 2021, I bought something. 2022, I bought something. And 2023, I bought a few. Actually, I didn't buy in 2022, but 2023, I bought 4 properties. And kind of going through a lot of that over time, my focus has kind of shifted. It was kind of the day job. And then in 2024, I had the opportunity to buy in. So I had bought into the company in 2024, kind of deciding it was kind of more of a kind of, it worked better for me. Then I kind of slowed back on investing a little bit. as I focus more on the business. But it was kind of more so, it made more sense to me kind of where I was at with everything and buying into the company versus like where I was previously an employee under the company. It kind of helped let me look at like, oh, I can kind of carve this to, or carve certain things how I kind of need them over time. And I have a kind of a knack for changing around stuff in a company and overhauling processes and things like that. Kind of worked out a little bit better.
That's your superpower.
Yeah, kind of looking at the P&L and going, oh, this is an expense, and why is this here, and finding all the different things out about that expense of why it's even there, and kind of evaluating that. That kind of sparked that, I guess, of where I look more towards business owner than kind of investor in the long term route.
No, I get that. I get that. And for those of you that are listening, my journey is similar but different than Sean's in the fact that I didn't have a retirement. And so by the time I reached age 40 and realized, oh my gosh, I'm down to like 20 years to create enough income to last me forever, I better get busy. So I realized that the only way I was going to be able to do that was in real estate. And so once I made that decision and started down that path, I just started learning everything that I could, and as it unfolded, I just kept stepping up and learning more and more and more. And like Sean, I love it. I love it. I love the buying and holding and the filling of the properties, and so I love that piece of it. So it feels good to be a good quality housing provider because folks are always going to need a roof over their heads. And it just feels good to know that you can have a good quality product and that you can present that to the communities and be a good housing provider. So it does your heart good when you know that you're in the right place. So looking back, what are some of the most memorable moments or milestones? Is there something that really made a big impact on you? For example, for myself, um, I was in the salon industry and I knew that I wanted to own my own buildings that the salon was in because I did not want to be one of those salon owners that ended up 30 years later with a shoebox full of rent receipts. I wanted to end up with a paid for building. And so, because I knew, again, I had to create my own retirement. And so, what were some big memorable moments or milestones, your aha moments, if you will?
A lot of real estate. I've always kind of had a kind of an interest in like some of the legal aspects of real estate. Property management is heavily involved, and there's all different types of legal considerations you have to keep in mind. Like it just kind of intrigues me, like the 5321 of the Ohio Revised Code, which is landlord tenant law primarily. Um, like all these different kinds of things like that. The Federal Fair Housing Act. And like Civil Rights Act of 1866, all these different kinds of things kind of play into real estate in a variety of different ways because you've got the leasing end, which is completely different than sales, and just kind of seeing how all these different things, contracts, that kind of stuff, it just overall has always intrigued me. So um, I'm sorry if I missed the nail on the head there. So that was kind of
No, I
something.
get it. And again, it's whatever your sweet spot is.
Mhm.
And I said at the very beginning, having a friend like you is so important because you're a wealth of knowledge in the areas that I'm not. And so if I want to have a legal conversation, Sean's my go-to because he does get down into the, as I say, down into the weeds when it comes to the legal jargon. And so I can get down into the weeds with all of that, but that's not on my daily agenda to do that. And so I love when I do have to look at a contract a little more in depth or look at a law that affects whatever it is that I have to deal with. And so I love having the conversation with Sean because he always brings new insight to it because he has delved into it a lot deeper than what I have. And so I always appreciate that. How has working as a landlord agent shaped your strategy? Again,
Um,
fulfilling both residential and or commercial.
Yeah, in both ends, you have you're adding another piece to that. Instead of like deciding what you want to do, you have to kind of keep in mind what is the owner's goal, what is their kind of what are they aiming to do, because it's you're acting as a fiduciary in their best interest. Um, my job's to help try to maximize their revenue as much as I can, um, and kind of keep their stuff effectively running. And with that, that whole other piece of the like having you're in kind of a customer facing end, but you have two sides to the coin. So you've got the tenant side. You're acting more of as a customer to them, but then you have your true client, which is the landlord. And so you have both ends to kind of you're kind of between, and you have to filter both ends. Sometimes you have a landlord that'll ask you to like do something that's like, oh, you can't necessarily do it this way, and here's why. And then you have the tenant who's on the completely other end of it. Um, so you're kind of working with, there's two different sides that you're working with, and you always got to kind of keep that in mind. Whereas as a landlord, you have your end and your opinion, and then you have the tenant side, and you only have one, or I guess customer per se. And that's
Yeah, so that can be a little tricky. So what happens when your standard of care of a tenant and the landlord, who is your first line customer, has a different standard? How do you resolve that?
a lot of times, if there's like a legal consideration with it, like, hey, I'd love to do this, but this is like we can't do it this way, and here's why. Whether it has like a perception of a, for example, like it may not necessarily be a fair housing violation, but it's a perception of that. Those are things I have to keep in mind because we have our policy. I have my license tied to a lot of this. So we try to mitigate a lot of that kind of stuff. Like, hey, here's how we do this and why. There's a legal consideration with this, or hey, we can do it this way, but like we can put the actual tile flooring in there like you would like and all that. But here's what's going to happen. It's not going to be as well maintained in a rental, or here's like we can give those different kind of. That was just like a blank example, but try to give the rationale behind it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if there's something like if it's something small that we can differ our process slightly on, or if it's like this is a big thing, we just have to keep in mind on our end that if I differ, like for example, if I do a different service offering for a client, okay, now I have to make that work with all my processes, workflows, my different staff, and
Okay.
they have to be able to know, oh, that's done differently. Sometimes we can't accommodate that if like a large difference like that. Like for example, maintenance approval limits make it is a hard one. If I have the approval for a property over here at 500, but then I have one over here that's 200, the $200 one, how am I supposed to track with like, for example, the maintenance coordinator? Hey, this one specific property over here, like this group of properties over here is this different approval limit. Those kind of get hard to juggle, especially as they build up. And if you offer it to one, then other people are going to be looking to have you offer it the same way.
Well, and God forbid if you had 20 different levels,
Yeah.
that you had to juggle. Oh yeah, I get that.
So those are
So
things that we
have some standardized practices that you use as a company and say this is our standard.
Yeah, so like we do the same thing with like, for example, tenants, like tenant placements. We have standardized criteria that we've set. Happy to go over those in depth with the owner if they're looking for property management. But the reason we do that the same way every time is because of the perception of a fair housing violation. You always have to keep that objective. You don't want anything to be looked at as like, oh, this is a subjective thing. This could be you denied them because of this or that. So that's kind of some of the considerations there that we.
Yeah, that's the next thing I want to talk about is filling those rental units. Now, what is your typical process for finding and placing a qualified tenant? Are there specific tools or platforms that work best for you? How have you come up with your standardized practices?
Yeah, so when a property goes, or so like when a property is done with whatever work needs to be done to get it up to standard to be able to lease. I won't go too far into that because we're discussing the leasing today. But once we have that unit ready, the first things we're going to do, we're going to do our final, like if we already did our inspection or not, we're going to do our final inspection, make sure everything's good to go for leasing. And once we've gotten that done, we've got pictures at that point. They either do them at the inspection or they've made a dedicated trip out there. But we get those pictures. We go ahead and we go ahead and generate a listing on our system on our end. We utilize a software called Buildium. And we also work with a system currently called ShowMojo that is a kind of it's a CRM essentially for leasing. It's primarily used for like the syndication to listing services like Zillow, apartments.com. So essentially, we're
Okay.
listed in one section and it lists them in all the other places for us. So we don't have to manually go to Zillow, apartments.com, and the 15 other websites there are for rental
And
listing.
tell our listeners again, what is that software called?
It's called Showmojo. That one's more for volume. I think they have a door requirement of at least 100 doors.
Okay.
There's some smaller ones, like there's Tenant Turner, and there's one that we're kind of looking at called Rent Engine. Um, Currently, Tenant Turner, Rently, and Showmojo were all bought out by Zillow within the
Okay.
within like the last I'd say 6 months.
Oh,
And
okay.
with that, Showmojo just hit us with a 30% increase on pricing.
Ah,
So
ouch.
we're kind
So
of
you're
looking.
looking at you're looking for some other options. Okay. But I see how valuable that is, or else you've got to pay somebody on your end to keep uploading all of these ads and then taking them down when it rents and putting them back up when you've got another one. And
Yeah,
using a platform like that just streamlines all your processes. I get that.
yeah, and I mean, Showmojo is a very powerful tool. Tenant Turner is also a pretty powerful one. That one works with Buildium. Like they have a
Okay.
set pricing with Buildium where you can do it as an add-on service to Buildium. So all of those have a lot of different features. Biggest thing to kind of shop around on is pricing, and what your goals are over time. If you're trying to do self-access showings over time, you're going to want to look at that and what the options are, what the pricing is there. But that's one of the main systems we use for showings. The things you're going to want to look for in a system like that is, do they have the touch points that you may
Okay.
not necessarily be able to always do? Like if somebody puts their information into schedule or whatever, and they go and they look at that property and then they decide I'm not really interested in that property. It does some constant contact type stuff to follow up with them, like, hey, you had a showing at this property. Here's some of the other rentals we have. It does a lot of that kind of stuff automatically.
Oh, so it even does some of your marketing for you.
Yeah, so it does some of the constant contact stuff once it captures that lead,
Okay.
like the Zillow inquiries, apartments.com, all those different types of things that come through those inquiries from there. It'll field all of those into that software instead of piling up your email with those. And then it'll do automated touch points with like the person. Like, hey, you haven't looked at a listing in a while. Here's some of the things that we have. And it'll do that up through
Okay.
there over
So
time.
that's huge when how many units are you dealing with right now?
I think we're roughly around 350, 400 currently.
Okay, so for those of you that are listening, if you're a brand new landlord and you've got, 2 units or 5 units or even 20 units, imagine having 400 to 450 units. And that's what Sean's doing. So you can see where these softwares are and these platforms are so priceless for him to be able to use some of that, because it takes a lot of that manual stuff that maybe we're doing. I mean, I have 29 units, and I might do 4 or 5 move outs, move ins a year, maybe on the high side, maybe 2 or 3 on the low side. And so uploading those one at a time isn't a huge deal for me, but you can imagine the volume that Sean is dealing with. So I get that. How do you handle your your tenant screening? What are your must-haves criteria?
Yeah, so the big one's going to be income. We have our income criteria set at 3 times the rent and gross monthly income, and
Okay.
we got off of the national standard. Um, with that national standard, like a lot of the studies have shown that no more than a third of someone's income should go towards housing, and that's how we come up with that basis. For metro tenants, or like Section 8 tenants, where applicable, certain areas prohibit some stuff like this, like the City of Columbus ordinance, for example. Um, but we will have a one times income requirement set with them because, let's say, for example, there's a tenant responsible damage to the property, like for example something simple like a towel bar or something. If I send somebody out there to fix that and the tenant's zero income and they're on Metro is not going to pay for it, and the tenant doesn't have any money to pay for it. And so, or like late fees, for example, if a tenant is late on their payments, um, those kinds of things. That's where Metro, we set an income standard like that so that if there's tenant responsible things, they can pay for those and they can't go, oh, well, I don't have any money. That's why I have Metro. So that's why we set that income requirement for them. Where applicable.
Do you ever fudge on that a little bit? If somebody's like almost there, but not, or does that come back into that fair housing?
If it's something where it's like within, like, for example, like $50. If you're $50 off on an income requirement of, like, for example, $1,000 a month rental and it's $3,000, $50 is such a small difference there, that we would kind of work with that. We have a set number in our policy as far as staying objective and everything. I think we do that off of a percentage of the rent difference.
Okay.
But it's a small number. You don't want to give them a ton of leeway on that. That's something that you want to be upholding, like, more of a strictness to, because the moment you start sacrificing your criteria of, like, hey, this person, they only make 2,500, but they're looking at renting this apartment that we would have a 3,000 income requirement on before taxes. You're kind of setting yourself up for, oh, now they're going to start slipping on payments. You're kind of, even if it's a property that's in, like, that's been listed for a while as struggling to lease, you don't want to sacrifice your standards and then end up having to kick them out 6 months later because they can't keep up with payments or they have another problem.
Because you end up costing yourself a lot more money than just waiting a while longer to getting the right tenant in there. What's some of your other criteria for the callers that are listening, our audience that's listening in, or maybe listening to the replay of this? What is some of the other criteria if it's say it's a newbie landlord, they're just now getting into the business, which is what a lot of my audience is, and they're like, oh, what should my criteria be? What do you recommend?
With background, we try to keep it. We keep it down to, like, the actual, like, generic, like the actual, like, in-depth categories. Like, for example, like, background on drug use and versus, like, drug manufacturing and distribution. Like, somebody with like a drug use type one. Now there's the ones that are like the marijuana ones. Those aren't really as big of a deal. But, like, the ones, for example, like, just straight drug use. That's normally for a lot of the, like, types of things that you want to try to avoid in a rental. So for a drug use charge, we have that at, like, 5 years, because we don't want, like, a recent issue with that.
Okay, so they have to be clean for 5 years.
Yeah, like, they're like the drug, or, like, if on, like, a criminal conviction type stuff, we would want to have that at least 5 years out. If it's manufacturing and distribution, that's like straight out, like, 15 years. Because we don't really want to be affiliated with anything like that. We don't want anybody to move in and then start setting up shop in a rental. Like, those are some of the things that I would kind of avoid. Have a clear policy on that kind of stuff in your lease agreement. You also want to keep those down. You can't just set, like, a generic, like, oh, no felonies within X amount of time overall. You want to set those down to the specific kind of things like that. That way you're not kind of running into issues where it's like, okay, cool, they had, like, one for, like, a bad check or something that was, like, 5 years ago. Well, if you set a blanket policy of no felonies within 10 years and okay, cool, they had a bad check thing 5 years ago, that could have otherwise been a positive tenant.
Okay, I get it. So you have to use some judgment there, but you've got the hardcore, we cannot rent if you fall into these categories. So I get that. Do you do, of course, the background checks to find that out? And some of your platforms, I'm sure, do that for you. You can,
Yeah.
do you do an additional background check? Do you have a go-to that you like to use for background checks, or do you let some of these platforms like Zillow, they'll kind of do a background check, but I find sometimes they miss some stuff. And
Yeah.
do you have your own preferred background check system?
Yeah, we use a product by RealPage, which owns Buildium. It's called a premium. It's called Premium Tenant Screening. It's mostly a RealPage product, but they have it on the Buildium side.
Okay.
We utilize that. That one lets us run credit and background checks without them having to initiate it on their end.
Okay.
Their approval is in our application, and then from there we can just run the credit and background check once they
Okay.
put.
So you get all that information, you then go through it, you make sure that they meet all the qualifications. And here is the big question of the day, because we've had a big debate about this on several calls. Can you put all your applications in one big pile and pick the best? Or as they come in, do you say this was the first to apply, this was the second, this was the third, and the first person that qualifies gets offered the unit? Which way do you do that?
We do it off of an order of application received. We've done it both ways at volume, and a huge downside to picking the best applicant, for example, is on the property management end. There's too much risk for us with that because with trying to pick or with the administrative burden with like of inputting that, doing a scoring system. We did a scoring system before. This was back in like I'd say 2021 through early 2023. We had it like that. We had a spreadsheet where they would do a scoring system. They would put all the details in, and we would pick best applicant. The legal risks with like perception of fair housing violation, even though there's no fair housing violation, is perception. If I get a fair housing complaint, it costs me at least 5 hours of legal time because I have to have a response letter drafted to the Civil Rights Commission. That's an attorney time. That's normally going to be $250, $300 an hour. That's a huge risk, especially since the perception of a fair housing violation. Like if you go, hey, you also have the people where, okay, cool, you ran 5 people's info, you charge them an application fee, etc. And then you have 4 people that you've charged and you've ran credit background checks on that you don't pick because you picked the 5th one. That kind of, at the same time, that would create a negative factor there with that applicant. Like, oh, you charged me money and then you're not even picking me, and it's not that I'm not qualified. And there was just a lot of things. There's a lot of considerations around it. It's a lot more work. It would need a lot more refinement. It would probably take years to kind of build a system like that for working at a volume that what we do, to gear it to make it perfect. But
I get it.
Perfect. But order of application received, if you would have otherwise accepted that applicant because you have your standard criteria, they met that, and you're turning them down because there's somebody that had a slightly better things that came in afterwards. If you would have already accepted them at that criteria, at that point I would just move forward with them. And I'm looking, okay, cool, that other applicant that came in that we haven't done anything yet with, we haven't charged them. Hey, we have another applicant that's proved on this. If they don't move forward for whatever reason, because we get that periodically, where somebody will back out. You can be you're next in line for that unit, but we do have this other one over here. If you'd like to move your applications over here, there's no charge to move them or anything like that. Some places try to do that. We try to kind of keep the leads moving, and so if there's another lead sitting around on this one of another applicant, we try to move them around to timely fill things, because we're running roughly 20 listings at any given point in time.
Right. And that's it. You're doing a much bigger volume than what we are. But I went to the same thing. I actually take them in the order. I numbered the applications as they come in, and the first one that qualifies, we offer the unit to. And again, it just makes things so much cleaner and clearer at the other end. So I agree.
And then where do you set like a standard point at which you stop taking applications on that rental? And then, okay, you've got a bunch of people in limbo while you're processing all that information. It's keeping a lot of people tied up in limbo is just kind of another thing there too.
Yeah. Nope. I get it. In today's market, with all of your marketing strategies, what do you find is the most effective when listing vacant units? That's always a big struggle for the small landlord that has just a few units. It's like, and some people get better results on some platforms than they do others. So what is your most effective?
The most effective thing I would say that we've changed, and this is I would say we did this about a year ago, was self-access showings was a huge one.
Okay.
We have showing availability from 7 a.m. through 7 p.m. every day of the week. That means okay, 5 o'clock on a Friday, and you're looking for a rental. If our office hours are only open till 5, and we have to have somebody there for you to see the place, and that next follow-up point on that person Friday at 5 p.m. is going to be Monday morning at 9 a.m. But if they can go onto our website, they can go, ooh, this is a nice rental that I want to go see. They can click schedule. They can schedule for 6:30 that evening, and they can see it same day, and then decide they want to put an application in. Having that technology in place where they can do a self-access showing, go see the property, go, oh, I really like this, and put in that application that same evening versus 2-3 days later when business hours start up again and you're open. And I can't just have like a staff member constantly looking at that stuff outside of their working hours.
So that's a win-win for you, because not only does the tenant get to see the unit sooner, but it takes a lot of that workload off of you of having a staff person go show the unit and monitor who wants to see it. And, you'd have to have somebody on call over the weekend to do that sort of thing. Is there a platform that, say, a smaller landlord with just 2 or 3 properties could utilize for that, or is it too expensive?
As far as like the systems for that, they thinking here. There's some other investors I've talked to that they found they found some boxes that are pretty good for what they've been doing so far. I don't have the name of those boxes, but they use like a lot of the text to access type features on those. They got them on like Amazon or something, and it's from a system. But there's CodeBox, there's a couple of other ones that mostly gear towards like the sales side. That have code boxes like that. ShowMojo, that's where they kind of had the difference, where we've been using their self-access boxes that are a little bit cheaper than some of those other ones, but they still
My
have all
guess
the
is, yeah,
features.
my guess is, and we hear this a lot in the short term area, in the short term community, that they will have a schlag, however you pronounce that. And I've heard it both ways. They'll have one where they can change the code remotely. And so they could actually monitor something like that remotely, and not have to drive over to show a unit, and they could still let someone in and then just change the code once they've seen it.
Yeah, there's also other box, or I think Sifely is a big like one of the companies out of China or something that is on Amazon that makes electronic like locks. Those I know have like one-time access codes. There's a lot of different ones like lock boxes and regular locks that like are electronic locks that have one-time access code features. If you can generate a one-time access code, definitely want to do like what our system does, where it differs is we're collecting a credit card and a photo ID from the person. So
Okay.
so we're collecting a credit card up front and a photo ID. So we have your info. If you go in and you look at the place and then you decide, oh, I'm going to take all the copper pipes or something. Okay, I have your photo ID and I have your credit card. I can go straight to filing a police report and get charges brought against you criminally if I needed to. Like,
Okay, so they've got a little bit of skin in the game when they're going out there, and the fact that they get their own individual code to get in, they know that. I mean, because one of the biggest, I would think, pushbacks on that would be like, well, how do you know that somebody else didn't go in after me and they're the ones that did the damage? Because they get a whole different code.
yeah, and then like we haven't had any issues like that. For example, I know of some other property management companies, like for example there's one in Columbus that's been doing this for over 8 years and they've never had a major issue like that in Columbus. There's between that and being able to give that convenience to people, we found that it's been very successful. There's some national statistics to show that when you have wide availability like that, that it cuts down on leasing time. Just with that example I gave, but there's a million different ways you can kind of phrase that example. But there's like actually people have been doing like statistics and stuff to try to show these differences over time. We see it in because we have some properties that are in-person showing only, that we have, and we can see a noticeable difference between the time frames.
All right. Now, how about platforms that you actually advertise the units on? Do you have one that seems to be more effective in your area over others? And would that vary depending on the area of the property as to what platform is more effective?
I would say, and this is something that with Zillow, Zillow, over 60% of our leads come from Zillow.
Okay. What's a close second?
I'd say apartments.com.
Okay.
but most of the leads now are coming from a lot of the platforms. Like the first place people are going are Zillow.
Okay.
Um, Facebook, Craigslist, that kind of stuff has gone down over the years here. We used to advertise to Craigslist. We don't advertise to Craigslist anymore because we don't get any leads out of it.
Yeah.
Uh, Nobody's really looking around for a rental on Craigslist anymore.
And I've never had a lot of luck with Marketplace on Facebook, but some landlords seem to have a lot of luck there.
Yeah, we do advertise on Facebook Marketplace. The big thing we do is we defer them back to our original website. Um,
Okay.
so we have the link to our website in there where they can go through and click and then go to our website with the scheduling and everything. We do it from a business profile. You can post up to 3 groups in a business profile. So you hit like, okay, cool. There's like Fairfield County rentals or whatever. There's this one over here and this one over here. Okay, advertise in these 3 groups because it makes the most sense for this property. And then um, with us doing it from a business profile, we have the auto replies on where, oh, thank you for inquiring. Please go to our website for all inquiries and call our office at this number.
Okay. So
Uh,
that eliminates, again, having a staff person because on Marketplace, you get, is this still available? Is this still available? Is this still available? Is this still available? And after a while, you're like, oh, come on.
and you can just set up a business profile that it limits you on how many groups you can post in, but to an
Okay.
extent, each area only has like one main one, and then
Okay.
two smaller ones should be fine. You're not going to get much more out of doing 6 Facebook groups because there's
Okay.
20 people in this Facebook group over here and 20 people in this Facebook group over here. But having that business one, it's free to set up like a business Facebook page, I think.
Yep.
Um,
I love that.
and then if you do that, you can set those auto replies on and you can tie it into a CRM. You can do that kind of stuff um, to where you're mitigating those leads from coming into the wrong source. So being able to defer people to like that kind of cuts down on that. Is that available? Because those is that available get auto replied to. Oh, please visit our website for more information on rentals, and you can contact us.
Okay. So again, automation sounds to me like if you want to scale, you have to start putting some systems in place
Yeah.
because you cannot touch all of these parts and pieces every single time.
Oh yeah.
And,
And if you have like, for example, we run about 20 listings a month. If you have a scale that you're working with, like let's say let's say you start getting up into 50 units range and you have like a large blip of vacancy, you want to be able to have some of those things built out up front to like, hey, here's how I handle a lot of these. That way, or if you ever have something where you're not able to work on those and you need to kind of hand it off to somebody, they already kind of have a basis there to go off of. But building out systems, process, documenting things as you go, that way you're not the only kind of bottleneck on this process here. That's
well,
kind of
and I teach my students all the time, and this will make sense to you, Sean, is I teach all of my students that you have to have when you're creating your systems, you have to have the position, not the person.
yeah.
And that way, whoever sits in that chair, this is what your job duties are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like you're dependent on, well, I got to have Sally because if Sally quits, she's the only one that knows how to do that.
Yeah, and you can take that a step farther too. If you have a person that's kind of doing a mix of like customer service and accounts payable, for example, those are 2 different roles there. That's under one person. It's not one role, one person. Um, and if you build your stuff kind of geared towards that, okay, this person's accounts payable and customer service. Now that you're breaking those off because you have enough there, then it's a lot easier to separate that stuff out.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Now, do you find a difference in your approach when you're filling a residential versus a commercial?
I would say they're a completely different approach. Um,
Okay. How does
with
it vary for you?
with residential, we're syndicating out to all the major platforms. We've got a standardized application that they're going in through, and it's a lot more automated. With commercial, it's a little less automated, and it's a lot more negotiating. With residential, you don't really residential leasing. You don't really there's not really a negotiation to it as much. Technically, there is a negotiation, but it's very minimal. Whereas on commercial, a lot of it is negotiating. Um, so the way I list commercial is I list it through the local MLS. I list it through like a bigger provider.
Okay.
One of the more common ones is Crexy. There's LoopNet, a lot of those different platforms. a lot of those platforms don't actually charge to get charge you as much for like listings and stuff. They charge you to get the metrics and the key market data for areas. But like Crexy emails me all the time, hey, do you have any listings? Can you just send us a
Okay.
link to it? And what they do is they have people in like Crexy, LoopNet, CoStar, all these big platforms. They have people who just go around, call people, and reach out to places like, hey, do you have anything to list? And they basically just copy and paste the listing.
Okay.
And those those are the more common places to advertise commercial, depending on what your target audience is. If you're trying, obviously if you're looking for something a lot bigger, you're gonna want to put it on a lot of those platforms. If you're doing something smaller in the area and there's not as many people kind of looking from out of town, then you just got to kind of like think about the different things. Who's the target kind of person for this space? Commercial, you've got office, you've got retail. Office is a little less negotiating. Retail is a lot more negotiating. Use type is a huge one. You want to know what your acceptable use types are. Like, for example, a shopping center, they're going to have an anchor tenant. They're going to have somebody like Walmart. They're going to have somebody like Target. They're going to have someone like Kroger who's going to have a set thing of exclusivity for what they do. But they're also going to have some limitations for what the shopping center can have in the spaces around it. And they're going to do all of that because, one, they're in a contract, and two, they want to keep the anchor tenant. That's what's bringing people into that shopping center to begin with.
Right.
Walmart doesn't allow cigar and tobacco places next to it. They don't want abutting up against it a cigar and tobacco place. So you can't put that retail space with that. They're going to want something different. So they might get approval, but another thing is exclusivity. If you have somewhere already in there that's like a home health place, they're not going to want another home health place opening up next door to them. They're going to have some sort of exclusivity there.
I ran into that because my background, of course, is in the salon industry. And so when we were thinking of opening other salons, oftentimes the shopping centers would have already met their criteria. They're like, nope, we can only have two, and we already have two, so sorry. Mm-hmm. And so if I had an empty space there that I owned, I couldn't put a salon there. Mm-hmm. So I get what you're saying. Yeah.
So those are a lot of the big things with retail. Retail, you have a lot of negotiating in terms of like tenant allowance for improvements to the space to build the suit. You have obviously your rent rate, which is normally per square foot. Then you have the responsibilities of who's responsible for what. Is this a net lease where tenant is responsible for a portion of the property taxes, insurance, CAM charges like common area maintenance, like landscaping, snow plowing, maintenance of the parking lot, that kind of stuff, maintenance of the building overall. What does the tenant do when the furnace breaks? Is it on the owner? Is it on the tenant? There's all those different factors, and those are more negotiable on the commercial end. Hey, we don't want to be responsible for this HVAC unit unless it's over X dollars in expense, or like because it's an older unit, we don't want to handle the maintenance on it, kind of thing, or have to front the cost of replacement on the tenant side. So those are like some of the different things you negotiate, and all those things kind of vary around. Like, okay, cool, you may not take as much of a win on the rent rate, but you're getting 20 grand in tenant allowance, and they're going to take complete responsibility over HVAC. So like there's different things.
You're in the middle trying to sell both sides of this deal. You're trying to work with the owner and work with the tenant to fill this unit. Yeah,
and with commercial, I'm either representing the tenant or representing the landlord. I don't like to put myself in a situation where we're representing both. I don't really prefer dual agency. Kind of limits what you can do, make suggestions to your client for. So on like the tenant side, I'd be like, hey, let's not take as much of a win here, but let's see if we can get them to do this because it's going to benefit you more. Or on the owner side, the same way.
Okay.
I've had ones that are more complicated deals for negotiating. Some it's just like, hey, what's the rent rate? Oh, I'm happy with the rent rate. We're going to move forward. This is this. And some deals move quick. Some deals take a little bit of time to negotiate with commercial.
What's your percentage between, I mean, as property manager doing property management, what is your percentage of residential versus commercial that you do normally within your company?
We're primarily doing residential. Most commercial stuff is not managed really as much. With commercial, the hard part is most of it's self-sustaining, and there's not really as much of a need for a property manager long term. Most of
Okay.
it's initial lease up because commercial kind of runs itself, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yep, I see that. I see that. Let's go back to the residential side for just a moment.
Okay.
Let's say that you are kind of, you're in the middle, and again, for whatever level of negotiation you can do between the owner of the residential unit and the tenant that you're trying to place in there. How do you balance all of that when you need to fill a unit quickly and one side or the other doesn't want to budge, and you haven't quite made that happen to fill that unit? How do you handle that balance?
So ultimately, we represent the owner, and
Okay.
so when it comes down to the end of it, we represent the owner's best interests, not the tenants. Tenant's a customer, the owner's a client. Um,
Okay. I get it.
so the fiduciary responsibility we have is to the owner and not as
To the
much to
owner.
um, but as far as like, there's not really as much with negotiating on residential tenants. Maybe a little bit if it's a unit that's been listed a while and they're like, hey, I really can't do this rent rate, but I'm interested if it's like X amount of dollars. We may look at, okay, cool, we can bring the rent down to there and go ahead and get this leased. We don't sacrifice standards when it comes to tenants as much. Like if this person, like, hey, this person would be an otherwise great tenant, but they have this thing that's a hard stop, like they've had 2 evictions, and oh yeah, one was in 2023 and one was in 2024. Yeah, no, that's completely out.
So they're just out. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Okay, give me, and I know no names, but give me a recent, or maybe not recent. Give me one of your toughest, challenging situations that you've encountered trying to fill a unit. Give us
Let
an example.
me think here. Um, you're looking for specific examples.
Something that maybe one of our newbies might run across and go, I bet Sean never had to deal with this before.
A property just like a lot of the big issue, like a lot of the issues we sometimes have is smaller markets, like okay, a village or a really small municipality. Outside of like the usual, like for example, Lancaster does pretty well, Newark does pretty well. So like let's say you have like a small area like New Lexington or like Logan or Bremen or like Baltimore. These types of areas typically have a lot longer of a vacancy time frame because there's just a lot less people. And a lot of times people who end up moving into these areas are ideally looking for like, oh, I was looking for Lancaster, but it was just the rent or the rent's too expensive there, or like this or that. But they end up settling for a different area. So you run into vacancy a lot quicker in those areas. So we've had ones where, like one in Logan was vacant for a while. It happened to be in the winter as well, where leasing slows down exponentially. And that one was it was on the market. We reduced the rent rate probably, I'd say 3-4 times, and it just still, it
When you
just,
reduce it, do you pull the ad, reduce it, and then put it back out with a new price and new pictures, or do you just go into your existing ad and reduce?
so the first time we lower our rent rate, we'll reduce and keep it on the market. The benefit
Okay.
of that is the previous leads get notified or from our system, like, hey, we just lowered the rent rate on this one. If you want to look at this again, it sends like a
Okay.
contact stuff. If it's one that is like, okay, cool, the last time the rent rate drop was like about, or like it was like within like 30, like over 30 days. Like people who were looking 30 days ago may not be looking now. So we'll drop it off the market and put it back on. Then it's a new listing and it helps with the syndication. Like apartments.com may put it back up closer to the top. It may have
Okay.
been time. Zillow, we have some paid advertising stuff with them. So they kind of keep our stuff closer to the top anyway.
Okay. Now, have you had to turn away a potential tenant, even though it's been sitting vacant for a while? And how did you navigate those tough calls when the owner is saying, get this rented? And now you've got some tenants that are applying, but you still have to turn them away. How do you navigate that with the landlord, with the owner?
With the landlord, it's normally, honestly, a lot of times, as long as like if it's like, hey, we had this applicant, they kind of fell through, we have this applicant, they fell through, we give them the justifications behind why that tenant didn't qualify. Their income, they didn't meet our income requirements.
Because again, you have to stick to your guns on for fair housing.
Yeah, we have to kind of stick to our stuff with fair housing, and then as well, not setting it up for a bad situation where we have to evict the tenant. So we keep with our standards if the person is just 100% does not meet our criteria. Now we have people where it's like, hey, your credit's not quite where we need it to be. You've got like, for example, housing collections or utilities collections and stuff. If we've got one that's kind of close and they have like a utilities collections, like the big issue with utilities collections is sometimes like, okay, you owe Lancaster Utilities. Lancaster Utilities is not going to let you set up service until you pay off that debt. We've had ones before where like they had like, for example, a couple $100 thing. They just pay it and we're good, and they give us proof of payment. We're happy and we move on, and it fixes their credit too.
Yeah, I get it.
I had somebody who owed. I had one who owed money to Fairfield Homes, and they completely paid off Fairfield Homes like $3,000.
Just to clear their record.
Yeah, they didn't even realize they owed it. Like it was on their credit, and they just didn't really. They were like somebody who didn't really use like credit as much, if that makes sense. They had a
Right.
from where they had moved out, and it had kind of accrued with interest and stuff, and they just paid it off. And we're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I didn't even realize I had this. It's all paid. Here you go."
And then you could move forward. Yeah. Yep, I
The
get
ones that
that.
we don't, we give a denial letter to be compliant with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Because if we run a credit and background check on them, or if we run a credit check on them and we deny them, we have to send them a formal letter for why they were declined. We normally send that via email. Banks have to do this as well. So if you've ever gotten an adverse action letter from a bank who's really picky about what they'll lend on, that's why you get an adverse action letter, is it's required by the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
Okay, I get it. Now, as folks are looking for properties, all the tenants out there, have you seen any different expectations today than maybe when you started? Are tenants expecting certain things in these units? And then you can tell your owners, your landlords, like, hey, this is what the tenants are going to want. So let's do this up front. Are you seeing any different expectations recently?
So as far as like age and things like that, that's been a thing for a while where, okay, a lesser, like an unremodeled property that's got some older fixtures and it just overall looks older to people from their perspective. Um, those do kind of turn away a lot of people. There's some people that are trying to go on the cheaper end and they don't care what it looks like as much. Like we get some people where they're like, oh yeah, this is, I mean, the rent's less on this. We completely understand and we're happy with it. So we still have stuff like that lease here and there where, okay, cool, it's got older wood floors that haven't been updated that are painted. That we have some of those here and there, and those do still lease. The rent definitely makes a difference. I mean, the rent's not going to be as high on something like that as an updated property. One of the big common misconceptions we see in the market is AC. AC doesn't make a difference, like at least in the C-class rentals, which is or a lot of the C-class rentals, which is what we primarily manage stuff of. AC doesn't make a difference on rent price. It makes a difference on appeal.
Okay.
So that's what we've noticed. And because like we can't get much more rent out of a place if it has, just because it has AC, it doesn't make like that huge of a difference. It's more of just an appeal thing with tenants. Some people are looking for AC, but honestly, most of the properties that we manage don't have AC.
Okay. Mine's about half and half, the properties that I own, and I own in a lot of the areas that you're talking about. So I get that, because a lot of my tenants, they don't even ask. So it works out really well, and we're getting reasonable rent. It's reasonable for both sides. So I get it. Are you finding, with some of the tenants these days, are they asking when they start to look through your properties? Are they asking for like HGTV? Do they want it to look with light neutral paint and the vinyl floors and upgraded fixtures? And is that in demand, or maybe not so much in rental communities?
I'd say, as far as Lancaster, for example, I'd say those move a lot quicker than some of the lesser updated properties. I mean, you're also getting a higher rent out of them too.
Right.
The thing that people forget on is the exterior as well. So okay, cool. You completely remodeled the inside, but the exterior, it still has flaking paint. It's wood siding. Like, what are you doing here? Are you going to go ahead and have it scraped and paint, or scraped, primed, and painted, or are you like? Those are some of the things that I kind of see. So making sure, like, if you're doing a reposition on a property, like, okay, cool, I bought a triplex and I'm remodeling all 3 apartments. Don't forget to touch the outside, because we see that quite commonly too.
Okay, good point. Good point. Because again, when a tenant's looking, one of the first things they're going to do is drive by and say, is this an area that I think I might want to live in? And as soon as they see it, you only get one chance to make that first impression. And if they drive by and see it, they might go, oh, I don't think I want to live there. And they never even get inside to see how amazing it is inside.
Yeah. Now, if you're working on the outside and it's just like a huge turnaround, like for example, when we manage like a larger apartment complex in Lancaster here, we had, well, I'd say larger. It was like around 30, 40 units. They were working on the outside, and it was like a 6-month overhaul on the outside. But they saw that work going on, and people were like, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of work going on here." We see like, "Oh, they're putting in new stuff over there, and they're actively like working on this." That that shows like that things are changing as well, especially when they see it walk in and they see a fully remodeled place and they see you're working on the outside. Um,
Then
but
that's a plus.
yeah,
That becomes a plus instead of a negative. Yes, yes, I get that.
standard what we kind of put in a lot of places is going to be we use classic silver. Like, I think it's a Sherwin-Williams color, honestly, but we mostly use Valspar. So we're using a gray paint, white trim. Trim, we don't sometimes bring white if it's, for example, like if it's painted brown and it just needs a little bit of touch up to it, and it's going to be a pain to try to cover up brown with white. You're going to be looking at 3 coats there.
Yeah,
sometimes, sometimes like, so wood stained or like a different color trim sometimes, that doesn't make as much of a difference. But if they see, like, those are the main things that people are kind of looking at, like, okay, paint's been updated, flooring, we're going to go LVP. If the hardwood floors are still in great shape, we try to retain the hardwood floors, because it's a little bit more cost effective if you can do like a light finishing on hardwood floors and not have to cover them up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It saves a lot in the long run. Let's get a little personal. We're just now at the top of the hour, so I'm going to get a little personal, Sean. How do you balance with everything that you're doing and you being in charge of this whole property management, and you already shared with us you're doing 400 to 450 units. How do you do a good life balance there between family and work? And because even with just 29 doors, it seems like every time there's a big maintenance issue, it's on a weekend. How do you handle and manage all of that just on a personal level?
Yeah, so a lot of the work-life balance type things, how I've kind of stanced that over time is, like, typically my day will end right around. This is one thing that I've normally kind of struggled with because I'm a workaholic, and
Me too. I get it. I get it. I am too.
I try to cut most of it off after like 5. If there's stuff that does happen, she's normally pretty understanding. If I get an after hours call and I have to go mitigate that, that takes half hour of my time, and then I'm good. But I try to mitigate a lot of that by, we don't really do anything for after hours calls currently. We looked at a system. The cost to outsource call handling outside of us is honestly, like, I think the quote I got was like $700-800 a month.
Oh, wow.
And so like that, I still handle the after hours calls primarily. A lot of that I try to mitigate. Like, we have on our after hours call system, we have like a hold music, like giving examples of what an emergency is, like, oh, danger to life, property, or whatever. And a lot of people, if they're like, yeah, I was just going to call about a fixture, a faucet that has a broken handle off of it, I'm going to give up on this because this doesn't sound like I'm in the right realm of where I need to be. And so that's kind of helped mitigate a lot of those.
Part of it is just educating the tenants on what is actually an emergency.
Yeah, like our hold music on the after hours line has at the end of it, like, oh yeah, and if this line doesn't answer and you have like a water leak or you smell gas or whatever, call 911. Like, people hear that and like on the hold music, and they go, it really makes them actually like think like, is this an emergency? Is this not an emergency? Because most of the after hours calls don't end up being emergencies.
Right.
Like, so it's helped mitigate a lot of those. The true emergencies, we either outsource those to a contracted vendor, or if our technician is, for example, available and able to do work at that time or in that evening. Like if it's something like, for example, we had one where like a door was kicked in, and that one ended up, we sent out a technician. He was able to get it resolved and everything. Door didn't even need replaced. It was just the screws were a little too short on it from where like 5 years ago when they put the door in before our time. And we got it mitigated, done. But did that answer the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. For those of you that are listening, I'm a much smaller version of Sean. So I only have 29 doors versus his 450. But I use a program called Inago, which is very similar to Buildium. But Inago has been designed for the smaller landlord, especially if you want to manage your own properties. It's a great platform to use. It's free to the landlord. Buildium, I don't think is. They might have a free version up front. I don't know. But anyway, there's several platforms like that that are available, and you can kind of do a Google search on that and ask Google to show you all the different platforms for property management. And Inago is just one of many. And the reason I like to use a platform like that, it changed my life when I did, because I no longer had to intercept and handle the phone calls and then decide again, like Sean was talking about, what is an emergency, what isn't an emergency. Because early on, as a brand new landlord, and many of you may agree with me on this, when you're brand new and you only have 1 or 2 or 3 properties, everything feels like an emergency because you've not done it before, and and you haven't gotten your sea legs yet, if you will. And so anytime a tenant calls, you're like, oh no, what's wrong with the unit? What do I got to run out? What do I have to leave dinner for to go out and fix? And I just felt like everything had to be fixed right now. And I realized over time, a short period of time, I realized that very few things are actually an emergency. And as long as the tenant knows that you have intercepted their call or their maintenance request, and tell them that this has been passed on to your maintenance team, then they're good for a couple 3 days, because oftentimes it is something that just a faucet's dripping or whatever. It is not an emergency. And so once I could wrap my mind around that and use a system like Inago, for me it's easy to manage, because once that all my maintenance requests come in through Inago, and Inago has the capability where I can simply pick up that request and forward it out to my maintenance team. And so oftentimes I don't even talk to the tenant, nor do they need to talk to me. The request comes in, I make a note back to them that their request has been received and we're forwarding it on to the maintenance team, and then I forward it on. And then the maintenance team calls them the next business day and schedules a time that works for both, and they go out and fix it, and then I just get the invoice. So that's what works. So don't make it more complicated than it is, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Sean, do you agree with that? That sometimes it's just getting your systems in place?
Yeah, I'd say that's a big thing, and then being able to diagnose and upfront with people on the phone. Like for example, oh yeah, my sink faucet won't shut off. Blah 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 blah. Okay, under the cabinet under there, under the sink, you're gonna see a shut off, or you're gonna see 2 shut off valves, and just turn both of those, and the water stop. Okay, yeah, the water stop. We're good. Okay, cool. That Saturday evening phone call of, hey, my sink faucet there, instead of sending somebody out that evening, which they're not going to be able to buy material because if it's after Lowe's and Menards and all those places are closed. That's where most of these vendors are buying a lot of their stuff. Some have supply houses and stuff like that when you start working with big plumbers, but a lot of contractors that you're working with are buying things from Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards. If it's a very material heavy job, like a sink faucet is mostly material, they can't buy that after hours already. If you can mitigate it, get them to turn the water off. If they can't use their sink faucet right there, okay, cool. You can't use your bathroom sink faucet. You've got 2 other sinks in the house. Trying trying to mitigate and diagnose with them to, okay, cool, the water is off now, or like the water stopped now, so it's not leaking, there's no running water, like that kind of thing. And mitigating it to the next day that you can do that. Some things don't need to be a weekend, some things do.
Right.
Diagnose with them up front, give them a good touch point of when you're next talking to them. Like, okay, hey, I understand your sink faucet, or we got your sink faucet shut off for now. It's your bathroom sink faucet. They should be reaching out to you Monday morning to get you on the books, probably for that day. Because a lot of our stuff's mostly same day or next day scheduling at this point in time.
Right. Ours is too. Yep.
And so, okay, cool, they'll reach out to you Monday and they're like, oh, great, thank you, blah, blah, blah. But if I didn't tell them that touch point of Monday, what's the chances that they're going to call Sunday and be like, hey, where's the person at? Are they coming? When is this getting fixed? Like, giving them that next touch point kind of lowers the chances that they'll call you prior to that touch point. Like, because you have some people who will call like, hey, I haven't heard from you. Hey, I haven't heard from you. And it's like sometimes like twice a day, a few times a day. Like, you don't want to have that thing where they're constantly calling you for that same item. And if you just tell them, hey, this is the time frame I'm kind of looking at here up front, then they already know, and they're less likely to call you.
No, I get it. And that works really well in my world as well. So we still have Adrian on. Adrian, did you have any questions for Sean while you're on? You can unmute and ask if you'd like. Comments or questions? Sean, I just want to say I appreciate you being on. Yeah, this has been great. We're going to upload this into our podcast so folks can listen in later as well. And if they have some questions for you, or if they're in your area and they want to work with you with your property management, let's say that they're ready to say, you know what, Sean, I'm just going to let you do all this for me. How can they connect with you?
Yeah, I'll put in the chat here, I'll put my email.
Okay, perfect.
And I also put the website as well if they'd like to go to the website. But email is normally the best way to kind of get in contact with me. And once I email back and forth with you, I'll normally give you my cell phone number and you can just text me then.
I get it. And so the platform, it's called We Focus For You, the number 4, We Focus For You, and just the letter U. So wefocusforyou.com. And so you can visit Sean there for those that are listening in. On the replay, I will also include that information in the actual description of the replay. So I appreciate you being here. And now I see here, it actually went out to all the hosts and panelists. And so what I'm going to do so that I can pick it up in my replay, because it doesn't give me that, I'm going to put it out to everyone. And that way it'll come up in my replay as well. So that I can, that's okay. That way I can put that in my description. So it's sean.lahr@wefocusforyou.com, and the website is www.wefocusforyou.com. And again, I'll put that in the replay. Sean, thank you so much. I appreciate you being with us today, and best of luck to you in your endeavors and the growth of your company.
Yeah, and thank you for having me.
I can't wait to see your new offices.
Yeah, it's getting there. He's actually over there working on stuff currently.
Yeah, so I'll give it a little bit of time, and maybe I'll meet up with you sometime for coffee some morning and take a little tour.
Yeah, El City is right around the corner here.
I know, I love it. All right, thank you for being with us, and we'll catch everyone next time.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.